Late at night, when the world has gone quiet and there's nothing left to distract them, avoidant individuals often find themselves faced with an emotion they've spent the entire day avoiding. Loneliness, it's not always loud or obvious, and they rarely acknowledge it, even to themselves. But it's there, like a low hum in the background of their mind, a subtle ache that lingers in the silence. During the day, they're masters at keeping it at bay. They stay busy, stay focused, stay distant enough from others that nothing feels too vulnerable. But at night, when the masks come off and there's no performance left to uphold, they start to feel the absence of something they won't name, the comfort of connection. They want to reach out, they want to be seen, but instead they lie in bed, frozen between longing and fear. They may glance at their phone and think about texting someone. Maybe someone who matters to them, someone they've pushed away, someone they miss. Their fingers hover over the screen, maybe even typing something out. But the thought of being emotionally exposed, of showing need, of breaking the illusion of control, often stops them cold. What if the other person doesn't respond? What if they think I'm weak? What if this opens a door to emotions I'm not ready to deal with? These are not just fleeting thoughts. They're deeply ingrained fears that override desire. The avoidant doesn't stay silent because they don't care. They stay silent because they're scared of what will happen if they're truly seen and not accepted. Tony Robbins often says that emotion is the ultimate force in life, but that people will do more to avoid pain than they will to gain pleasure. This is the avoidance internal wiring in action. The idea of reaching for connection is alluring. Part of them craves it. They imagine being with someone who understands, who listens, who sees past their walls. They fantasize about simple moments of comfort, a hand held, a head rested on someone's chest, someone saying, "You're not alone." But each time that fantasy begins to feel real, the fear kicks in. If I open up, will I lose control? Will I regret it? Will I be hurt again? And so, instead of leaning into connection, they retreat further into themselves. This retreat is not always conscious. It's a pattern built over years, sometimes a lifetime. And yet, despite their best efforts to stay emotionally contained, the truth surfaces in the quiet. It surfaces when they replay the last time someone tried to get close and they pushed them away. It surfaces when they think about the friend they ghosted or the partner who kept asking for more and finally stopped asking. And they feel it even if they can't say it, that the distance they created to feel safe has become the very thing that makes them feel alone. It's a heartbreaking realization they rarely act on, but that doesn't mean they don't feel it. They may try to numb this feeling. Scroll endlessly, binge shows, stay up too late for no reason, anything to avoid sitting with the ache. But avoidance has its limits, and eventually the loneliness makes itself known. And even if they won't admit it the next morning, even if they go back to being distant and composed, those nighttime moments of vulnerability are real. In fact, they may be the most honest parts of their emotional lives, because when the world is asleep, the avoidant is left with nothing but their truth. And that truth is that they are not as immune to connection as they pretend to be. They want it. They just don't know how to pursue it without feeling like they're risking everything. This isn't about weakness. It's about survival. At some point in their past, they learned that needing others was dangerous, or at the very least, unreliable. They learned that independence was safer than vulnerability. So now, even when their soul is screaming for intimacy, their mind is trained to shut it down. But the need remains. The longing doesn't disappear just because they refuse to act on it. And so they lie there, caught in the emotional dissonance between who they've trained themselves to be and what they secretly want. Someone to reach back, someone to understand the silence, someone to know that the absence of words doesn't mean the absence of love. That silent battle rages on night after night, and while they may never confess it, their heart whispers what their pride refuses to say, asterisk, I wish I could let you in, I just don't know how. Asterisk avoidants spend much of their day keeping emotional distance, often believing that by doing so, they're protecting themselves and maintaining control. But late at night, when silence wraps around them, and there's no one left to impress or defend against, something shifts. They begin replaying the conversations they had throughout the day. Moments that seemed insignificant at the time now come rushing back with weight. Words they said without thinking, times they pulled away when they could have leaned in, expressions they kept neutral when their heart wanted to respond. All of it starts to echo. In that quiet space, away from the distractions and performance of daily life, the avoidant is forced to face what they won't during the day, the emotional consequences of their own behavior. This reflection often comes with regret, even if they don't label it that way. They think about how their coldness may have hurt someone they care about, how they brushed off concern or avoided a deeper moment that could have brought them closer to someone. But instead of processing those feelings with openness, they internalize everything. They overanalyze what they could have said, how they should have responded, and why they always seem to pull back just when things start to feel good. These aren't fleeting thoughts. They are persistent loops that play in their mind long into the night. Tony Robbins frequently teaches that the quality of your life is in direct proportion to the quality of your relationships. For avoidants, this truth often sits just outside their awareness. They know relationships matter, and they do care, but their default mode of detachment creates emotional blind spots. It's only in these quiet moments when the performance ends and the defenses relax that they begin to see how much their distance has cost them. They wonder whether the people they love can really feel that love, or if their behavior only ever communicates indifference. They start to feel the impact of what they've withheld, and it stings. They don't express this pain openly because admitting it would mean confronting the very vulnerability they fear. But internally, there's a war happening, a tug of war between the part of them that wants to stay safe and distant and the part that longs for real connection. Late at night, the protective mechanisms that serve them during the day start to feel more like barriers. They begin to realize that the silence they use to protect themselves is the same silence that isolates them. The emotional armor they wear keeps them from being wounded, but it also keeps them from being loved. In those moments of quiet regret, they may feel the urge to reach out. They may type and delete a message multiple times, hovering over the send button, battling between impulse and restraint. They think about saying sorry, about acknowledging what they've done, about expressing something real. But more often than not, fear wins. They close the app. They convince themselves it's not the right time, that the other person probably doesn't care anymore, that reaching out would make them look weak, and just like that, the window closes. This kind of inner conflict is exhausting. It creates a hidden emotional burden they carry without sharing. On the outside, they might appear unaffected, even indifferent. But on the inside, especially at night, they're reliving moments they wish they handled differently. They carry around unsaid words and unreleased emotions like a quiet weight on their chest. They may wish they had the courage to be more open, more present, more responsive. But instead, they go to sleep with the knowledge that they didn't show up the way they could have, and that knowledge hurts more than they'll ever admit. What makes this even more painful is the fear that it might be too late, that the person they love has given up trying to reach them, that their pattern of pushing people away has finally left them alone, but they won't say it, they won't pick up the phone, they won't send that message, because the fear of rejection, of being seen in their emotional rawness, still outweighs the need for connection. And so they lie awake, quiet and alone, filled with silent regret over things they will likely never say out loud. This regret, this late-night awareness doesn't make them bad or broken. It makes them human. It shows that they do feel deeply even if they don't show it in the ways others expect. The key isn't to push them to speak, but to understand what that silence holds. Because behind it is someone who's replaying everything they wish they'd done differently, someone who cares more than they let on, someone who's trying quietly, invisibly, to make sense of their own heart. In the stillness of the night, when there's no one around and the lights are low, avoidant individuals often experience an internal longing they rarely allow themselves to acknowledge during the day. Deep down, beneath their layers of self-reliance and emotional restraint, is a quiet craving to be held not just physically but emotionally. They long for connection, for the warmth of a human presence, for someone to sit beside them and simply be. But they don't want it on anyone's terms but their own. That's the paradox they live with, a yearning for closeness that feels dangerous the moment it becomes real. They fantasize about intimacy but fear the vulnerability that comes with it, so they bury it. During the day, they operate with control. They stay composed, emotionally guarded, and focused on tasks. They keep people at a manageable distance, never too close, never too far. But at night, when no one's watching, those defenses lose some of their power. They might lay in bed and imagine what it would be like to have someone close, not just near in proximity, but truly close in spirit. Someone who understands without demanding, someone who could hold them without trying to fix them, someone who could give them comfort without pressing for more than they're ready to give. But the thought of letting someone into that space makes them feel exposed, so they stay alone, even when their heart is calling for touch, safety, and connection. Tony Robbins often says that people are driven by two forces, the desire for love and the fear of pain. Avoidants are no exception. They deeply desire love, but that desire is wrapped in protective instincts. They've often learned early on that closeness can lead to disappointment, suffocation, or loss of self. So even when they want to be held, they imagine how quickly that moment of warmth could turn into vulnerability, how being touched might lead to expectations, how comfort could become dependency. And in that internal debate, they often choose solitude over exposure. The problem is, solitude doesn't satisfy the craving. It just masks it. They may wrap themselves in blankets and pillows, not just for warmth, but to simulate the feeling of safety they won't allow themselves to receive from another person. They may watch movies or listen to music that triggers emotion, not because they enjoy sadness, but because it gives them a controlled way to feel. They might scroll past images of couples not with jealousy, but with quiet resignation, a part of them wondering if they'll ever be able to let someone in enough to experience that kind of closeness. Not because it's unavailable to them, but because they're unsure whether they'll ever feel safe enough to surrender. Avoidants don't reject intimacy because they don't want it. They reject it because they fear the loss of themselves within it. Being held means letting go, and letting go feels like losing control, something they've relied on for survival. So they compromise, they long in silence, they hold themselves together, they convince themselves that they're fine alone, even while their body aches for contact. They pretend not to care while imagining what it would feel like to be loved in a way that doesn't feel threatening. Sometimes they test themselves, they think about reaching out. They consider what it would be like to ask someone to stay the night, or to rest their head on another's shoulder. But then the questions come flooding in. Asterisk, what if they misunderstand? What if they ask too much? What if I change my mind halfway through and can't explain why I'm shutting down? Asterisk, these questions don't have answers that feel safe, so they retreat again. It's not that they're rejecting the person. They're rejecting the fear that closeness will spiral out of their control. This cycle leaves them feeling caught. They want to be touched, to be known, to be seen in their softness, but only if it doesn't cost them their sense of independence. So they suppress their need and carry on, and no one knows, because on the surface they appear strong, unaffected, and detached. But late at night, when no one's asking anything of them, when the world is quiet and they're finally honest with themselves, they know the truth. They wish someone was there. They wish they didn't have to be alone to feel safe. They wish they could feel close without feeling trapped. This longing doesn't make them weak, it makes them human. Beneath their distance is a deeply emotional being who feels intensely but expresses selectively. The desire to be held is not just about physical comfort, it's about the craving for acceptance, for peace, for a moment where they don't have to protect themselves. And while they may never say these things out loud, they feel them, every night, in silence. And with each quiet wish for connection that goes unspoken, they remind themselves that they are still learning how to love, and how to be loved without fear. In the late hours of the night, when distractions have faded and the stillness sets in, avoidants often find themselves caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions they rarely allow to surface during the day. One of the deepest fears that begins to rise in these quiet moments is the haunting thought that their emotional defenses, the very walls they've built to feel safe, might eventually push away the very people they care about most. It's not something they talk about. It's not something they even fully admit to themselves during daylight. But in the solitude of night, they feel the weight of it pressing against their chest like a silent alarm they can't turn off. Throughout the day, their avoidance patterns feel like protection. Distancing themselves feels smart. Keeping conversations light, avoiding emotional depth, staying in control, these behaviors help them preserve a sense of autonomy and prevent the discomfort of vulnerability. But at night, those same behaviors begin to feel like liabilities. The absence of connection doesn't bring peace, it brings emptiness. They lie in bed and wonder if the people in their lives understand what their silence really means. They question whether the person they love has interpreted their withdrawal as indifference, their hesitation as lack of care, their coolness as a sign they don't want to be close. And that thought terrifies them more than they'll ever show. Tony Robbins teaches that we all have emotional needs, and when they go unmet, pain becomes inevitable. Avoidants have a powerful need for certainty and control, but they also need connection and love, whether they admit it or not. When the day is done and there's nowhere left to hide, their unmet need for closeness starts to make itself known. They begin to feel that their coping strategies meant to preserve safety might actually be destroying the very intimacy they secretly crave. But the idea of changing those patterns, of letting someone in, of not being in control emotionally, still feels like a threat. So they sit with that fear, quietly, alone. It's not that they don't care. It's that they care too much and don't know how to express it without feeling like they're losing themselves. So in the stillness of night, they recall moments maybe earlier that week, maybe months ago, when someone reached for them emotionally and they pulled away. Maybe it was a partner asking for deeper communication. Maybe it was a friend showing vulnerability. In those moments, they felt overwhelmed, cornered, uncertain of what to say or how to respond, so they chose silence. They chose space, they chose what felt safer, but lying there at 2 a.m., they questioned that decision. They wonder if that moment was a turning point, if they lost something important, if their pattern finally became too much for the other person to carry. But even as regret builds, action feels impossible. They think about reaching out, saying something honest or kind, maybe even apologizing, but 1,000 fears swarm their mind. What if they don't respond? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I seem weak or needy or emotional? So they stay quiet. And in that silence, they feel the pain of disconnection, the very pain they've spent their life trying to avoid. It's not punishment from others, it's the result of their own fear-based choices. And the weight of that truth is heavy in the dark when they're left alone with the reality of what they might be slowly losing. This fear is not loud or dramatic. It's quiet and persistent. It lingers in the background of their thoughts as a low-level dread that someone they love will eventually stop trying, that they'll stop reaching out, that they'll stop caring, and deep down they know it's possible because people get tired. People need emotional responsiveness. People eventually believe what your actions say, not what your heart silently feels. And for the avoidant, this is their greatest internal conflict. They love deeply, but they struggle to show it in a way others can understand. And so they live with the risk that their love might go unnoticed, unreceived, or even lost. But instead of changing course, they often double down on their patterns. They tell themselves it's better this way, that they're not built for deep emotional intimacy, that space is safer. But in the quiet, those stories begin to unravel. They realize that space can become a cage, that silence can feel like abandonment even when it's not intended that way, and that being misunderstood isn't just frustrating, it's heartbreaking. Not because they failed to love, but because they failed to show it in time. So they lie awake, staring at the ceiling, hoping that maybe the people who matter still feel their love, even if it's hidden behind hesitation and fear. They won't say it out loud. They might not act on it tomorrow. But in the privacy of their own mind, they feel the fear that their emotional distance might cost them something they can't afford to lose. And that quiet fear, that is love, silent, unspoken, but very, very real. Even though they rarely admit it, avoidant individuals often carry a quiet hope buried deep beneath their emotional distance, a hope that the people they care about won't give up on them. This isn't something they voice directly. In fact, they may act as if they don't need anyone at all. They might behave in ways that seem indifferent or even cold, especially when things get too intimate or emotionally intense. But late at night, when their guard is down and they're finally honest with themselves, that buried hope starts to surface. They lie in bed and think about the people who have tried to love them, the ones who have shown up despite their silence, their withdrawal, their hesitation. And what they feel in those moments isn't relief, it's fear. Fear that one day those people will stop trying. It's easy to misunderstand avoidance as emotionally unavailable or incapable of connection, but the truth is much more complex. They love in quiet, indirect ways, and because they struggle with vulnerability, they rarely offer verbal reassurance. Instead of saying, "I need you," they create space. Instead of saying, "Don't leave," they pull away. And this creates a painful contradiction. They're most distant from the people they care about the most. They assume the people who matter will just know that their silence isn't rejection, that their distance isn't disinterest, and that their avoidance is really fear dressed up as independence. But not everyone knows, and that's what haunts them late at night. Tony Robbins teaches that love is not a feeling, it's an action. But for avoidance, action is complicated. They often express love through presence, stability, or loyalty, but rarely through emotional closeness or affirming words. So when they withdraw, they aren't thinking about how their actions might be misread. It's only when the world quiets down that the realization hits. People can't read minds. People need words, they need warmth, they need to feel secure, and suddenly the avoidant fears they've failed to give what matters most. They think about the friend they haven't reached out to, the partner they've emotionally shut out, the family member they kept at arm's length. And under the surface of that reflection is a plea they'll probably never say aloud. Please don't give up on me. This internal fear is rooted in something deeper than pride or stubbornness. It's rooted in shame. Many avoidants carry the belief that they are somehow too difficult to love. They fear that if someone really knew how emotionally complex they are, how they shut down when things get hard, how they run when they care too much, how they struggle to express affection, they leave, and so they test people unintentionally. They push, they pause, they retreat, not to hurt, but to see if someone will stay. If someone will love them even when they can't offer the same emotional transparency in return. At night, these fears swirl. They imagine scenarios where the people they love finally walk away. They wonder if their silence has been interpreted as apathy, if their distance has been seen as a lack of love, and they don't know how to fix it, because to fix it would require vulnerability, something that feels like walking through fire for them. So they hold on to the hope that their loved ones will understand, that they'll see beyond the behavior and recognize the heart behind it, that they'll stay patient a little longer, that they won't leave just because love looks different coming from them. But the longer they stay silent, the more that hope turns into fear, and the more that fear grows, the more they withdraw to avoid facing it. It's a loop they can't escape unless someone on the outside breaks it, not with pressure, but with patience. Not with demands, but with steady presence. Avoidants don't want to be chased, but they do want to feel chosen. They don't need constant reassurance, but they long for quiet signs that say, asterisk, I'm not leaving you just because you're hard to read. Asterisk, that kind of reassurance, even if unspoken, can be the one thing that keeps them anchored. They may never say these things out loud. Their ego, their wiring, their fear, these things all conspire to keep the truth hidden. But it doesn't make the hope any less real. Deep down, they're waiting for someone who won't give up. Someone who understands that silence isn't always the absence of love. Someone who can offer them space without abandoning them. Someone who sees them not just the behavior, but the fear underneath it. And even if they never say it, their heart whispers it every night. Asterisk, please, just don't walk away. I'm still trying. I just don't know how to show it the way you need me to. Asterisk, there's a strange contradiction that plays out in the heart of an avoidant person late at night. On the surface, they value solitude. They function well in silence. They often prefer their own company and find peace in independence. And yet, when the world slows down and the noise disappears, that very silence becomes heavy. What once felt like freedom starts to resemble isolation. They may tell themselves they're better off alone, but lying there in the dark, there's an unspoken ache, the realization that they're deeply misunderstood even by those closest to them. Not because others don't care, but because few truly grasp what their distance means. They want to be alone, but they hate feeling like no one sees through it. Throughout the day, they perform. They show up strong, competent, emotionally reserved. They keep things light, steer away from vulnerability, and make sure no one gets too close. These are not random behaviors. They're well-practiced defenses. But in their quiet moments, when there's no one left to guard themselves against, they begin to wonder if people really know who they are beneath all that emotional armor. They fear being labeled cold or uncaring, when in reality, they feel deeply just differently. But they don't know how to bridge the gap between how they express love and how others need to receive it. That confusion leaves them feeling alone in a way that isn't just physical, but emotional and spiritual. Tony Robbins teaches that one of our deepest needs is to be seen, known, and appreciated for who we really are. And that's exactly what avoidants often long for in the depths of the night. They want someone to understand them, not just their silence, but the tenderness behind it. They crave a connection that doesn't demand performance, doesn't push for more than they can give, and doesn't misunderstand their emotional boundaries as rejection. They don't want to be fixed. They don't want to be pressured. They just want someone to stay, someone who sees their quiet love as love, even if it's wrapped in space and autonomy. But here's the catch. They rarely speak this out loud. They fear that if they voice their inner world, it'll be misinterpreted. That if they say, "Sometimes I need space, but I still care," it will sound like a contradiction, so they stay silent. They may even push people away when they get too close, only to feel regret once the door closes. Then, in the middle of the night, they think about those people, the ones they've distanced themselves from, and they hope with everything in them that those people somehow understand, that they can see past the withdrawal and recognize the affection that still lingers underneath. Avoidants are often exhausted by the assumption that their emotional distance means they don't want love. In reality, they want love that honors who they are, love that doesn't demand constant emotional expression, love that is patient, grounded, and strong enough to sit in silence without needing to fill it. They don't need someone to pull them into vulnerability. They need someone who can sit beside them in their stillness and say, "I'm here when you're ready." Because they are not unloving. They are protective, and that protection, while it serves them, also isolates them. Late at night, they wish they could explain this. They wish they could turn to someone and say, "I want to be close, but I need it to feel safe." They imagine being held without expectation, being understood without interrogation. They think about what it would feel like to be accepted exactly as they are, with their emotional pauses, their silences, their walls. And they ache with the fear that no one ever will, that people will keep assuming they don't care, that the world will keep misunderstanding their self-protection as detachment. This fear is real, and it weighs on them. It makes them question whether they'll ever find someone who won't take their emotional space personally, whether they'll ever be truly understood. And while they may not show it, this loneliness stings in a quiet, invisible way. It builds with every unspoken feeling, every moment they wanted to say, "Please don't walk away just because I can't say how I feel." But they don't speak it. They just feel it, alone, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone will understand their silence is not the absence of love, but the way love feels safest to them. And in that stillness, as they wrestle with the longing to be understood and the fear of being misunderstood, they face a truth they rarely share. They are not choosing loneliness because they don't want connection. They are choosing silence because they don't yet trust that their truth can be heard without judgment. Until they do, they will continue living in this emotional in-between, longing to be known but afraid to be seen, wanting connection but terrified it will cost them the only peace they know how to keep.